just want to preface this by saying in 1985, my band recorded the only live video we ever have.
Is this Chop?
Chop Shop.
Chop Shop.
1985, 9:30 Club, Washington, D.C. Drove down there because we were slated to open for Birthday Party.
Were you actually? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Is this recording already? No. Oh my reaction then. So you were going to open for the birthday party?
We're going to open for Birthday Party. And not all of them got their visas to America. So their tour was canceled. And we ended up opening for like some other band, I don't remember who.
That is such a sad story.
It's a horrible story. It's the closest we ever came to.
I was actually going to ask you about the birthday party and if you'd seen them when they were playing in New York at any point, but I didn't imagine you guys might have opened for them.
Yeah, we're gonna.
So I'm guessing that might have been the bassist Tracy Pugh or something. I think he got his visa turned down. He had jail time or something, so he was never going to make it over.
Yeah.
Wow, well that's a good opening. Yeah,
Totally.
birthday party.
We did open for Butthole Surfers.
Yeah?
Yeah, we opened for Red Lorry, Yellow Lorry. Do you remember that?
No, I've never heard
Oh,
of
Red
it.
Lorry, Yellow Lorry, they were cool. They were like a 1980s kind of post-new wave British band.
Okay, I don't think I know them, but the birthday party is already impressive enough.
Yeah, totally.
You guys must have been gutted when that didn't happen.
Oh yeah, totally. Because
And
we
if that-
wanted to be that.
What year was that?
1985.
So that was right at the end.
Yep.
You must have been pretty much gone by that point.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh wow.
Oh well.
Missed opportunity, but there you go.
There you go.
Yeah, I was going to say before we started, but you started with that. Mo was telling me that when you first came to Aberdeen, she put you up in maybe a slightly rough area of town, nothing terrible, but slightly rougher. And she was kind of, she was worried about it, and she got in touch with you, and she went, I'm so sorry, blah, blah, blah. And you said, Mo, I grew up in New York in the 70s, it doesn't matter. And we're panicking about you maybe not being able to deal with Aberdeen, and you grew up in the 70s in New York.
Yeah.
And I wanted to open with that really. What was it like? Were you aware when you were growing up there that this was a significant thing, or was it just like any other adolescence?
Well, no, it was just where you grew up.
Yeah.
That's all there was to it. In retrospect, of course, you have bragging rights.
Mhm.
But when you're in it, it's just where you grew up.
Yeah.
And so I think I got, as far as I'm concerned, I had a particularly lucky birth because, number one, born in the 1960s in Manhattan, growing up in Greenwich Village in the 1970s and 1980s, I don't think I could have picked a better time or place to be.
Yeah.
Maybe 5 or 6 years earlier.
Yeah.
Like if I had been born maybe 5 or 6 years earlier and grown up in the village, like forget it, it would have been too much. But so I spent a lot of time at CBGB's for all the shows. Yeah, CBGB's is literally like a 15-minute walk down the street from my house.
You're kidding.
And an 8-minute skateboard ride, a 5-minute skateboard ride, which is how we got there anyway on Bleecker. And so I saw a lot of amazing bands there, but I just missed by literally 5 years, Talking Heads starting out there, Blondie starting out there, all those guys.
They'd already started their ascension by that point.
They had started their ascension. Yeah, by the time like 1982 came around, when I was, 1981, 1982, I was 14, 15 years old was when I was starting to go out and see bands.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were already playing bigger shows like Central Park Summer Stage or Forest Hills and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it was before Stop Making Sense or any of that stuff, but Blondie had already hit it really big.
Yeah.
So, but there was everybody else, there were Johnny Thunders and, you name it, they were all down there.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
What a start to life. Also, it's kind of obvious to say, but there seems to be such a friction between where you started in 70s New York with the punk rock scene and all the acidity of that environment, and where you ended up. You went over to India and you found yoga, and I'm always quite interested in how you found that transition, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that, how you ended up going from one extreme to the other in some sense.
It wasn't so much of an extreme really, because the punk rock movement in New York that I was part of, and also the Gothic scene and all that, was all about freedom of expression. It was about finding out who you were outside of the norms of society And society had these dictates, which was go to school, graduate, go to university, graduate, get a job, work for the rest of your life, retire, die. And that was the trajectory.
Yeah.
And I didn't see any meaning or purpose in that. Like from an early age, I was thinking, is this what it is? I don't have much interest in this. And I had some teachers at the time who gave me a little bit of a molding in terms of what we were reading and how we were thinking to begin this journey of self-exploration. Who did I feel that I was? What did I feel that I wanted to do? How was I going to find meaning in my life? And I was finding meaning in my life through art and through music. And so at first I thought I was going to be one of those two things. So I was playing music in bands, and at a certain point I realized I wasn't a musician. Like I liked playing music, but I wasn't a musician. Okay. And I liked painting, but I wasn't really an artist. And those two things have never left me, but I knew that I couldn't excel with either of those. Yeah. And I started to know that when I found yoga and started doing yoga. I was about 18 or 19. And that really spoke to me and called me. Because I had been on an active quest so far to think about things and to figure things out and to be like fully engaged in things that I felt were creative, yeah. I could listen to what yoga was telling me. And that was, this is for you. You know, this is you. And there was no yoga scene at the time.
This is in New York?
This is in New York, and I've said this like on many occasions. We had no yoga mats. There was no yoga clothing. There was no wellness culture, thank God. There was none of that stuff, you know? Yeah. There was just a spiritual quest. Yoga was, you only went to yoga because you were on a spiritual search. You were looking for liberation, enlightenment. You wanted to know who you were or are, any of those things. That's why you did yoga. There wasn't any idea I'm going to do yoga because I need to get healthy, or I need to reduce stress, or I need to get fit. At least not the people I was talking to or hanging out with. And so it was very much in line with the punk rock spirit of self-expression. Nice. And now here's another self-expression. Here's an expression through yoga of like the ultimate self. And in punk rock it was like the individual self trying to be creative with how my hair looked. You know, back in the days when I had mohawks, I had green hair, I had pink hair, I had all the hairs. And I started bleaching my hair and eventually I ended up with less than hair. You know, Advaita is not two-ness, and this is like a hairness without hair. So that's how I ended up. And I'm pretty sure all the bleaching of my hair at the end of those days had something to do with it. Maybe. Anyway, whatever. So, but how creative could you be to express yourself? And we took a lot of joy in that. And we also spent a lot of time doing it. I mean, to get your hair to stand up this high, it's commitment. It takes some work, you know. It takes some hairspray, it takes a hair dryer, it takes an hour of time. Your leather jacket has to be just right, you know. You need, you know, the jeans are going to be bleached, whatever it is. So it takes time. And people would, from the outside, look at it and go, those guys just look like a fucking mess, man. You know, take a shower or whatever. Like, I've already showered because I needed my hair cleaned before I did this, you know. Exactly right. This took a long time. So, and we took pride in that and delight in that. So there was something very fun and creative, and the music was part of it, the people was part of it. But there was also this thing that was happening in the early 1980s, at least on St. Mark's Place and at least around CBGB's, where you had the skinheads who were, many of them were like super violent. And then you had this other group of skinheads, like Harley from Agnostic Front and, John and other guys as well, who were all Hare Krishnas. And so they were vegetarian, and they were following Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada, and so they were a bunch of like, straight edge skinheads, and this is really before Minor Threat also. Okay. There were straight edge skinheads who were not violent, not beating people up all that much, and they had these cosmologies that were very, very deep and pretty far out. And then you had the punk rockers, and then you had the peace punks. And the peace punks were the people who I was hanging out with,
Okay.
Number one, because I was super timid, I was scared of everybody, and being nonviolent was a way for me to avoid confrontation. So I was hanging out with the peace punks, and some of them were reading Gandhi, and other ones were vegetarians, and other ones were doing this, that, or the other. So there was this whole, influx of Eastern thinking into this punk rock scene and into the hardcore scene as well. So it was absolutely present. So to make this leap from those scenes into the yoga world wasn't a big step.
So it primed you for it rather than...
Totally. They were right next to each other. And all that happened to me was a change of hairdo, because you can't do a headstand with a mohawk, and some change of clothing, and some change of the people I hung out with.
So how did you literally find yourself in India for the first time? What made you make that leap? Because that's a big leap, especially back then. We didn't have the internet or anything like that. And you were able to make your way over there. And I read in your book, which I'm about that far through, you can see the bookmark, you were saying that you travelled the length of India trying to find teachers, and there weren't that many teachers when you were going over to India in those years. What actually was the catalyst that actually made you visit India in the first place?
I went to India to do a yoga teacher training at Shivananda Ashram in South India.
Yeah. Okay.
Shivananda Ashram was one of the bigger institutions of yoga at the time. They're still very big. And they had a teacher training program there. It was a month long. So I went there to take that training. That was 1988.
And how did you find that training?
I loved it. I loved every second of it. It was, for me, yoga was about attaining samadhi. It was about raising kundalini. It was about enlightenment. That's what I understood it to be from the books and from Ram Dass and, the people who I knew in New York. And so, and the way to go about that was to, in my understanding, stay at the ashram, get up at 5 a.m., satsang at 6 a.m., first asana class at 8 a.m., breakfast at 10 a.m., karma yoga at 11 a.m., study time at 12 noon, Gita class at 2 p.m., asana pranayama 4 p.m., dinner at 6 p.m., satsang at 8 p.m., bedtime at 10 p.m. That was scheduled,
It's like a monastic life.
A lecture, a 2-hour lecture somewhere in there, I can't remember where. And that was it, and I loved it. That was like, I was fully immersed. I loved the ashram life. I loved the yoga. I loved meditating. I loved listening to the lectures that I understood nothing about, and not a single bit. I didn't understand a single thing about Gita or Yoga Sutras or anything. None of it made any sense to me. But I was on an inner journey, and I could sense that. And I was in some place that provided a context for that inner journey. Like everything in the ashram is a setting for you to find yourself, quote unquote, and to do service and to express devotion. So all those three things have to go together. Otherwise, they don't really work. And New York City doesn't really provide you that setting. It provides you some other settings whereby things can happen and cool stuff can happen. But it doesn't provide the setting where there's nothing else except for this quest. That's why people like to go on retreats and things like that, because the setting is there for you. And so I loved it. And then I stayed in India for several months after that, traveling, going to temples and going here and there and everywhere. In any city I went to, I would look for yoga teachers, which is why I said in there, you didn't find a lot of them back there. You found some, but not a lot. And probably the ones who were the really great spiritual masters were hidden away a little bit. You weren't going to find them from a signboard. Now there are a lot more yoga teachers in India.
Yeah.
A lot more yoga schools.
Do you remember what it was when you met Tavi Joyce that drew you to him? Anything specific? What was it that captured you in terms of what he was offering?
Well, he as a person didn't really capture me. It was the yoga he was teaching that I liked. I studied with him for quite some years. And as a person, the first time I met him, and even the first year I spent studying with him, I had my doubts about him, which I didn't really listen to. But I liked the yoga that he was teaching, and I thought it was good. So that's kind of what I stayed around for. So a lot of problematic things happened around him, which I don't think we need to go into now, of gone into those in other places. So Krishnamacharya's teachings, which have filtered through a bunch of different teachers, have profoundly touched the world in many different ways. And so that's what I was linking into, like you and everybody else who have come to these teachings. Is there's something deep in the technique of linking breath and movement and awareness together. And they had particular formats of doing that, which were very direct. And it felt like a sort of a next step in terms of a physical practice for me from the Shivananda yoga I had been doing. Things just kind of came together in a different way. And so I did that for a while.
Nice.
Yeah.
So in your book you described yoga, I've got the quote here, as easy access mysticism. And when I think of you and what I know of you, I think of yoga but also music, which we touched on earlier. And if you were to describe, you also in your book describe yoga as your like essential purpose. You were talking about this Hindu idea of finding your essential purpose in life, and for you, you said you viewed yoga as this for you. How would you define the role of music in your life?
The role of music in my life, I think yoga, like music, is an essential part of my life. And it gives me energy, gives me hope, fills me with creativity. It expands my mind to think in different ways. It is, music is the song of the soul made manifest. And I listen to music all the time. I mean, not all the time, not in this moment, of course, but
what was the last thing you listened to before you came here?
the last thing I listened to before I came here was Abattoir Blues.
Was it?
Yeah.
Well, the whole album or just a song?
No, just that particular song.
That's a great song.
It's an amazing song.
He talks about waking up with a frappuccino in his hand. I love that line. The sort of mundanity of the whole thing mixed in with something that's reaching for beyond that.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that song up. That's a good one.
Yeah. And before that, I was listening to the new Sigur Rós album.
I haven't heard it.
It's gorgeous. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Wow.
It's really beautiful.
Are they still working with like a non-language? Like
They're still with non-language.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a big orchestra on this album. I think it's like a 40-piece orchestra, or maybe it's a 10-piece orchestra. I don't know, it's a big orchestra. And it's really beautiful. And you hear hints in there of a lot of sort of the, melancholy 1980s, this mortar coil type of things, and there are orchestral type things, but it's very much Sigur Rós. And the whole album it's like one long solid soundscape of an album. I think there are 10 songs or something like that on it, maybe 11. But the whole thing moves together as one piece, even when the songs break up.
Nice.
It's really gorgeous.
I'll have to check it out. I was going to ask you, obviously you're really into music, I'm really into music, and sometimes I feel personally like I can't quite figure out if I'm comfortable merging my personal yoga practice with music. And I want to ask you, why is it that some teachers will choose to teach with music during their class, and other teachers would choose to never teach with music during the class, and they'll never practice with music, they'll always practice or teach in silence? And where do you stand in that particular question?
Well, I can't practice to music because I don't hear it. I mean, I can put something on and then it will be gone because I'm paying attention to my body, my breathing, and my awareness, and I don't hear the music. So, and if I'm going to listen to the music, then I'm not going to be paying attention to what's happening inside of me. So, I don't play music when I practice, and I don't play music when I teach. I only play music when I teach once a year. That's on David Bowie's birthday.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. And we have a David Bowie birthday class every year since he passed away. And I make a David Bowie playlist, and we practice along to whatever
I would love to come to that.
my favorite Bowie songs are at the time. Yeah, it's really fun. I put in a bunch of new songs this year also. The Memory of a Free Festival, for example, we haven't used that one before. That's an old song. It's such a good one. Sweet Thing from Diamond Dog, Sweet Thing Candidate, Sweet Thing is perfect for sun salutations because it's like almost an 8-minute song, so you can do 3 8 in the time of one song.
Yeah.
So, you know, I like everything to match up with it. So it's choreographed. It's very choreographed.
Okay.
And I'll spend weeks practicing along with it to make sure everything is timed up right.
Yeah.
It's not just like throwing on a random Bowie song.
Really? So
No,
you're
it's
really
got to.
meticulous.
It's got to fit. So that's the only time of year that I play music when I teach. It's very purposeful. I understand that with certain types of yoga that are maybe slower or less focused on subtlety, that music can be helpful for people in those classes because they can relax, or maybe they're not so used to being with themselves or things like that. I remember when I was first doing yoga in New York in the 1980s, there was a place called Jivamukti Yoga Society, later became Jivamukti Yoga Center, and they used music in the classes, and when I taught there I used music too. And I liked it. I enjoyed practicing along with music at that time. But the yoga that was being done, which was basically Shivananda yoga at that time, it lent itself to being able to listen to music because you were hanging out in a pose for a while, not doing much, you know, just trying to stretch.
Yeah.
So if you're just trying to stretch,
It has a different intention.
it's different.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to do yoga, then you're not going to hear the music.
I'm with you. I feel personally, if there's music, sometimes the music pulls the rhythm of my breath, so I can no longer connect to my breathing rhythm because I'm getting drawn into the pace of whatever's on.
Yeah.
So I prefer not to have it, but I almost feel guilty. It's almost like having a best friend and not inviting them to your party or something. It's like you love music, but you never mix it with your yoga practice.
No, you don't have to feel guilty about it. It's absolutely fine.
That's good to know.
You're the music. The muse of music understands that music is an expression of the patterns of nature and the patterns of biology. And within us, we have a symphony of sounds occurring. We have our heartbeat, we have our respiration, and our heartbeat changes in its rhythm as well. It's not dun 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 dun, but it's dun 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 dun. It changes in pattern. Our digestive juices, things that are clearing out from the brain, like we have a cacophony of sounds inside of us, and they merge together to make a symphony sometimes. And so all we're doing when we create music is we're pulling these inner patterns that exist, and we're drawing them out and expressing them through strings or through a drum. You know, the drums were essentially first the heartbeat, and then they became complicated patterns. So and all instruments, in all stringed instruments, at least, and a lot of the horn instruments, were made to mimic the human voice, which is considered to be the greatest instrument of all. So everything is an expression, like in all instruments as well. Sorry if I'm going on a tangent with this, but all instruments are human-made. They're man-made, women-made, they-made. They're made by people. Instruments are not made by animals or vegetables or minerals or anything like that. So we have made the instruments, and that way means we have made them so that we can express something through them. We have made music so we can express something through it. What are we expressing? The things that we're hearing and feeling inside of us. And then we need a vehicle to bring it through. Now, I don't think that asanas and pranayama and all those things are any different than that. We have, these are things that you can intuit these things, you can spontaneously do them, you can bring them forth. They're an expression of something. So all of these things, they're expressions of humanity that are inspiring in their own right, and they don't all have to go together.
Yes, they could.
You don't need to eat pancakes and carrots. You can eat them separately. They're both going to be good.
Yeah. I was wondering, it's something that struck me a lot when I pay attention to the wider yoga community and those who do use music. There's often a certain quality to the music that you'd associate with the yogic lifestyle. It's often more cyclical or ambient or softer. And today you shared the track by the Beastie Boys. There's so much spike to it and so much aggression, which I love in music. And I was wondering if you talk about why it is that as yogis we tend to often lean away from that kind of, it's not seen as like yogic music, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Most of the music which is like, yoga music or stuff like that, I'm sorry, folks at home, I can't listen to it. There's very little of it that I can listen to. It's too antiseptic for me.
Yeah.
And there are other, so let's type Sigur Rós, for example, or Explosions in the Sky, or Mugwai, or, you will know them by the Trail of the Dead, or any of these bands like that, which do extremely huge sweeping landscape type sounds, soundscapes that take you on a huge journey. And they build, and they can crescendo, and they can bring in all sorts of crashing instruments and then get quiet again. I can listen to that all day long.
Absolutely.
I love that type of music. But I can't listen to like binaural beats. I can't listen to innocuous, synthesizers that don't really go anywhere, or chakra sounds and things like that. It doesn't move me. It moves other people, and that's great, but it doesn't move me. And I understand how it's so gentle that it's not invoking in people any particular state other than a state of maybe quiet or calm. There's nothing in there to disturb you or make your mind wander here, there, or excite your passions or whatever. That's not why I listen to music. And that's not what I look for in music. So I think that's probably some of the reason why that stuff has become popular, because it's non-intrusive, it's not offensive, and it doesn't cause you to go into any particular emotional or mental state. It's trying to encourage calm. That's great. That's cool. I dig it. But I'd rather listen to video games. And in September or October, actually, in October, I am going to do one more class to music. And it's, Lou Reed, who, Lou Reed.
I know Lou Reed.
And he had written some music called the Hudson River Meditations.
I've got that in my notes, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
There's Tai Chi.
Yes.
Yeah.
I used to teach Lou, and I taught him up until just before he passed away. And every time when we would practice, which would be on Tuesdays, he would put on Hudson River Meditations. And it was a very beautiful piece of drones. It's like very interesting drone music.
Yeah.
And he would say, I don't even know how I made this music. He said, I couldn't even repeat it again if I wanted to. He just somehow came up with it. So the Hudson River Meditations have been remastered, and they're coming out in September or October. And Laurie Anderson, who is his wife, or partner, and a dear friend of mine, asked me to write some of the liner note essays for the record.
Really?
Which I did. So I wrote an essay for it.
Wow.
And which I was like, I was so happy about. Yeah, it's crazy. And so we're going to do a record release party at the temple, and I'm going to do a yoga class set to like Lou Reed, Hudson River Meditations, and some of his other,
When's this happening this year?
It's happening this year.
I'm going to try and
come to New York, man. I'll let me know. Just come by.
Yeah.
Awesome. That'd be great. And so we'll do that also. So, for example, his drones, they work very well for me. They're very layered and interesting, and he was a genius too, with tonality.
Did you ever listen to Metal Machine music?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would not do yoga to that.
It's a whole other type of ambient.
But it's amazing,
Yeah.
Yeah, his ambience is amazing.
I read in literally his final day, I don't know if this is hyperbole, but I read on his deathbed, he was looking out at the trees, and he was still doing the Tai Chi. It's called the 21 form with his hands.
Yeah, this is true. He was on the beach with Laurie at their house out east in the Hamptons.
I find that very moving.
Yeah, it's extremely moving. It's extremely moving. And I think that all yoga people, meditation people, spiritual people should hear about that story. They should read about that.
Yeah.
And it's a rare soul who at the time of their death can recall their spiritual practice and be engaged in their spiritual practice when their spirit leaves their body.
Yeah.
That's the most profound thing that there is in existence. And it brings tears to my eyes whenever I think about it, how profound it is. It's a rare person who can do that at the time of death, be present with death. And that's what all yoga moves towards. I mean, honestly, all yoga moves towards being present at that time of death. And the Bhagavad Gita speaks about it, the other Hindu texts speak about it. But eventually we're all going to be there.
Yep.
And what state of mind, what state of consciousness will you be in when your time has come? So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
I'm glad you brought it up. I was also confused because I watched an interview with him from, it must have been 15, 20 years ago, maybe a little longer. And it was with a New Zealand reporter, and she was trying to build rapport with him, but he was quite truculent in the interview. And he brought up Tai Chi, and then she brought up her yoga practice, and he just came down on her so hard like a ton of bricks about yoga. And he said, I've got a lot of doctor friends and they say yoga is terrible for you because it damages your knees.
And I'll tell you one other thing. Some doctor friends of mine have told me the people they see most with knee problems are yoga people.
Blah, 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 blah. And then it felt like after 20 minutes, or maybe a little less, he kind of relented a little bit and he went back to it and addressed her practice. And so I always had in my head that he was anti-yoga from that. And then I heard that you taught him yoga, and I thought, well, clearly you must have caught him after that stage where he was bristling against it.
What year was the interview?
Hard to say. I couldn't tell you. It's on YouTube. It's quite a long one, and it's from memory. It's almost like a mushroom-coloured background. And
I haven't seen it.
Check it out.
So when I first met Lou Reed through a guy named Julian Schnabel, who's an artist, who's also a student, and he thought Lou should do yoga with me. And I met Lou first at Julian's 60th birthday party. My wife was seated next to him. She had no idea who he was, care less, and she's French. And they had an engaging conversation in the entire evening. I think he was quite aware that she had no idea that.
Were you jealous, or were you okay with this?
I didn't want to sit next to him. I was like, what am I going to talk to this guy about? And so they hit it off great. And then he did that show at St. Anne's Warehouse in Berlin. He did Berlin live.
Form Berlin.
Yeah, the entire hour. And Julian was filming that for the movie of Berlin. And it was an awesome show. It was like amazing.
Were you there?
Yeah, I was there. And so afterwards, when we went backstage, Julian introduced me to Lou and said, Lou, you need to meet this guy, you need to do some yoga with him. And Lou said, no, I'm not going to do yoga, it's bad for your knees.
You said that? Okay. There you go. Okay.
And I thought, this is the grumpiest guy I've ever met in my life. Yeah. But Julian said, no, you just, it's going to be okay. I said, don't worry, we'll watch your knees.
Okay.
And so I took my number and gave me a call and said, okay, let's try it out.
And was it asana you were working on, or was
it? We did some asanas, we did meditation, we did pranayama. And he would tell me what he wanted to work on, and I would avoid all of his pain spots and help him with the things that were painful and strengthened other places. And he did, Tai Chi 6 days a week, and took one day off and did yoga with me on that one day off. We did that for a number of years.
Nice.
But he was extremely quick to anger, but then very quick to kindness afterwards. So he was a beautiful person. And all of that softened over the years. I read about that in the book, actually.
Yeah, okay, I haven't got to that bit.
No, it's much later. You're just in the beginning. You haven't even gotten anything interesting yet. Now it's like...
Mo messaged me and said, should read this book, and I was like, I've got a book pile this big.
Yeah.
And I resisted it.
No, just put mine at the top now. All those other books there, you can read them later. Like the sun has been shining on it for a while.
I know, right?
This is what you do.
Hate it.
Skip to chapter 11. Go right to chapter 11. You don't need to read the rest of it.
The first thing I opened on, we were talking about Led Zeppelin, and I thought, that's a good start. And then I went back to the start and started reading Deepak Chopra, and I thought, I like this and enjoying, and so I thought, I'm just going to read the whole thing.
Cool. Or just skip to chapter 11, read chapter 11, and then read the acknowledgements, and then go back and start at the beginning. And then in the acknowledgements, you'll see the songs that I listened to when I wrote the book.
Okay. With Lou Reed, I think my favourite song is Sad Song at the end of Berlin. It's like the cap on the whole album.
Yeah.
And it was like you said earlier, it's this just gargantuan crescendo of sound.
Yeah.
I ended up covering it for a long time when I've done a YouTube video covering it. And that's one of those pieces that moves me so intensely, but it's also incredibly unsettling as well. It's quite disturbing, and the whole album is quite unsettling and disturbing. And for me, that's what always draws me to music. I don't like it when it's, as you said, antiseptic. And I feel like sometimes a little bit of a square peg in a round hole in the yoga community, because as we discussed, music sometimes feels like it has to be slightly neutered. Otherwise, if it's not neutered, then it's a little dangerous, and you can't be a yogi and listen to that kind of stuff. So it's nice to hear you square the circle in terms of this kind of music. And
it's so interesting what you said about Berlin also, about it being an unsettling album. And there's like about 4 people who are going to listen to this podcast now. Which is probably one more than normally listen to my podcast. But it's so interesting that you said that it's an unsettling album, because this is one of the reasons why Julian wanted to film it. Like, he could have done any full album of Lou's at that point. But he wanted this one because it meant a lot to him at a certain time of his life. And there was that element of challenge and struggle that he was going through. And Berlin was a very good soundtrack for him. It wasn't even a very popular album in the beginning. No. People hated it.
Yeah.
So but then they did, for the encore, after they finished the album, he did Sweet Jane.
Oh, right, okay. That's a total switch.
Which was ridiculous. It was so amazingly good.
I would love to have seen him live. I never got the chance. Did you ever, do you enjoy music of Leonard Cohen?
Yes, of course, definitely.
Did you ever see Leonard Cohen?
Never.
Neither did I missed the chance.
Yeah, I mean, when he was doing his last tours, I was in India every time he was performing.
Well, I had a chance to see him in Edinburgh and I missed out, and I thought it's fine, I'll get him next time, because he seemed to be touring forever at that point, and then he died.
Yeah.
But I often quote something of his when I'm teaching, which is it's from, I think, his final album. And he has this line where he says, "The goal falls short of the reach." And I love that, because it's such a compressed idea, but we come back to this all the time in the practice, that you're not trying to achieve something, you're working on the process, not the destination, if you know what I mean. And I feel often like you get these gems from people who aren't regarded as yogis or yogic, although I know Leonard definitely dabbled in yoga throughout his life.
More than dabbled.
Yeah.
More than dabbled. I mean, he lived in a Buddhist monastery.
Yeah.
And he was a student of Ramesh Balsekar.
Yeah.
I mean, that's more than dabbling.
Yes, it's a fair point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard a quote about it, which was Leonard Cohen never found a religion he didn't love, and he practiced like all of them at some point or another. But yeah, Mount Baldy, wasn't it? That was the...
Yeah, I had a friend who was living there at the same time as Leonard Cohen was, and we spent time together. And Leonard Cohen was the only person who was allowed on Mount Baldy with an instrument. Yeah,
and he would drink in the evening with what was the name of the guy? I can't remember his name.
Can't remember.
Yeah, but he was allowed to have a little bit of, I think, sake or something in the evenings.
It happens.
So seeing the synergy, something that often strikes me when I think about my music life and my yogic life. Not that they're distinct, but when I try and separate them, I feel like there's a huge parallel when you immerse yourself and commit yourself to music, and when you immerse and commit to yoga. And when I think about when I learned instruments, I feel like there's 2 ways you can, broadly speaking, learn an instrument. One is you pick it up and you move through intuition, and the other is you get lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of commit to some kind of rigor. You go where you practice, you come back, you perform at your lesson, you get tips or whatever, you go back and you keep going. And when I think about yoga, I think you can have a similar kind of bisecting path, where sometimes it's all intuition and you're trying to connect and feel, and it's no use listening to someone else because you have to feel it for yourself. But then there's other times where you need to, you have to show up to class and you're connecting with your teacher, and you're going away and you're literally using the word practice. Even the word practice is shared by those 2. And I was wondering if you see a parallel between music and yoga in that sense, or if you see them as almost like separate.
Yeah, no, I do see a lot of parallels, but it's a parallel that people maybe might not like, or agree with, but for Ashtanga yoga, which I did for 25 or 30 years or something like that, 1991 until about 2 years ago when I started changing my approach a little bit to how I was practicing. We have formats, primary series, intermediate, third, fourth, or advanced A, B, C, D. And these are formatted practices that you do every day. I'm pretty much of the opinion that all we're doing in Ashtanga yoga is practicing scales.
Yeah, that's the analogy I use about.
Yeah, we're practicing scales, and you can get really good at scales, and they're fun to do. And sometimes when you play scales, you go into a flow state. But you're not creating music.
There's no expression.
You're not making songs. You're not moving or changing the world. You're not making people laugh or cry or jump for joy or feel enthusiastic, or just playing scales, which is good. That's how you learn what the instrument is. You learn how to handle the instrument. And so we are an instrument that has different layers. We have the instrument of the body, our instrument of the breath, our instrument of our emotions and our mind and our intellect. And we're learning how to handle all those things from playing these scales of yoga. Any format of yoga will do that. All of them work equally. And it's, some people like to play guitar, some people like to play bass. Some people like a cello, some people like a violin. They're all stringed instruments. Play them differently. And same with yoga. You like this one, that one, the other one, you still are going to play scales, and it's going to sound pretty great, and you can go into a flow state. You learn how to manage the thing that you're holding in your hands on all different levels. But eventually you need to do something with it.
It reminds me of Matthew Sweeney, the teacher who went off and created, Matthew Sweeney created other sequences like marine sequences and bound and line and stuff like that. And I think a lot of Ashtangas sometimes feel uncomfortable with this idea that you can go out with any kind of framework. There's some kind of comfort for a lot of people in thinking that there's like a meticulous railway line of asana that you can go along every day and that doesn't need to change. And I was wondering...
And for some people it doesn't.
I was going to ask you about that. Do you think where do you stand on it? Do you think people should work the scales and then once, like as you would with your musical instrument, once you've accrued enough skill, then you can start improvising and express? Or do you think people can just take the wrong path, and for some people they never need to learn the skills? Where do you stand on that?
Well, the world is filled with lots of different people. And the world is filled with a lot of different approaches. And sometimes you need one approach for a while. Sometimes you're good with one approach for your entire life. And sometimes you just go with the flow and you're happy already and you do what comes along with you and you're not looking for anything from the thing that you do because you're already okay. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of different things that can be done. One thing that people can consider is either you can try to learn a practice because you think you want to do that practice, or you can find a teacher who you trust, who you feel can guide you to do things that are going to help you expand and help you discover the things about yourself which you're looking to discover. And I think these are two basic generalized groups. Try to learn a practice because you like that thing and you want to get good at it, you want to see what it can do for you, or find a teacher who can help you grow.
Do you see them as equally valuable?
Yeah, I do. Especially if the practice itself is going to give you something. Because you can go to a teacher who has a lot of flaws, who might be teaching a very good yoga practice, and come away with a very valuable tool. And so that can give you a lot of benefit in life. Or you can go to someone who's not teaching something necessarily complicated or, elaborate, but it's very direct and it tells you everything you need to know because that person has experienced some deep level of truth that they can then help you find within yourself. So both of them are fine. And I think also it's important to remember that a lot of people who are teaching yoga, who might be very celebrated people, most of them are just yoga teachers. They're teaching asanas, they're teaching some pranayama, and then they're human beings and they might have a whole bunch of things about them that make them very human in different ways, and sometimes in ways that we don't particularly like, and sometimes in ways that are harmful to other people. But then they're teaching yoga. And so to try not to elevate them beyond the status of what they are, which is they're a yoga teacher, they're teaching some asanas and pranayama. That's it. That has its value. That's the level that they're teaching. And I know for certain, like, that's my level. I teach people yoga. When people ask me what I do, I'm a yoga instructor. I'm not a spiritual teacher. I'm not guiding people along their spiritual path. I'm teaching some asanas and pranayama and some meditative techniques, and I teach them chanting, and I do all these things myself. And I consider myself, if anything, a spiritual friend of the people. Like, that's the milieu that I like to operate in. But what I do, I'm a yoga teacher. That's it. And you know who the big spiritual teachers are, because they'll give you the profound lessons that lead you through.
Do you think it's a natural thing for people who first start practicing to go through that they do put their teacher on a pedestal? Is that something that we should just expect as normal and just accept that it will pass? Or is it something we should really fiercely guard against even from the get-go?
You mean me personally with my students?
I mean, in general, I think certainly in the last 10, 15 years there's been such an explosions on explosions in terms of the yoga becoming almost supernova in terms of how many people are practicing and how many people are teaching. And it's something in the back of my mind, this idea that as humans we're often falling into familiar patterns of structure in terms of this person's at the top and then we listen to that person. And I suppose this feeds in something I want to ask you about in terms of the balance between teacher and student. How do you find some kind of healthy balance yourself? Are you pro complete equality, or do you feel like that can sometimes cause a mess in the room, or where do you stand in that?
Well, I did not have a healthy teacher-student relationship with Pattabhi Jois. This thing about hierarchy and all that, like when I started getting good at Ashtanga yoga, I didn't realize at first I was getting good at it until people started saying, "Oh my God, you're so good at it."
Right.
And then I started thinking, oh, maybe I have a place here or something, because I was a little bit lost at the time. I was young. I was in my early 20s when I started with it. And then when I started seeing, like after some years I had a place in the hierarchy, like I wanted that place. I wanted to be close to the guru. I wanted to have the place of importance and be seen and have some authority or whatever. All that stuff was not healthy, and it was very encouraged also within the group of folks who were around him vying for attention. So that's common. That happens in all sectors of society, not just in yoga.
Absolutely.
Everywhere, from sports to music to theater to you name it. So, me personally, I do not like people to have any other ideas about me other than I'm just some idiot doing yoga and teaching some yoga, and that's it. I do what I love. I build the things that I love. I have a lot of energy and a lot of creativity, and I enjoy that. And I like making things. And I like making cool things. And I like being around people who inspire me and who are creative. And so I absolutely 100% love what I do. I'm super grateful about everything I learned from Pattabhi Jois. But I learned a lot from India itself, not just Pattabhi Jois. India has given me my entire everything. The temple we have in New York, the way that it's decorated, the mantras that I chant, the deities I worship, the livelihood that I have, my ability to write what I write about, all that's from India. And I'm immensely grateful and always will be that I can do that with my life. And yeah, it's a struggle. It's hard to make a living as a yoga teacher. You know that. We all know that. But still, just to be able to do it is awesome. And so that's the only space I want to inhabit. I'm not going to inhabit, and I don't want to inhabit the thing of having people think I'm something special because of this, that, or the other, or my word is important because of this, that, or the other. The only place my word matters is if I'm teaching you something. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. Like if you're a student in my school, be there because you'd like to learn something from me. What do I have to teach? Only my experience. which is limited, to the past 3 decades. But if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to listen to that, that's fine, but then you don't need to be there. So I only want to have people in there who would like to learn what I happen to be doing. But they don't need to think I'm anything more other than someone teaching them a tool. I'm a guy in a bakery who makes a really good baguette. I am a guitar teacher who can teach you the proper way to play a D chord. I am a language teacher who can teach you how to pronounce something without a terrible English accent. I'm a yoga teacher who can teach you how to do this thing, that thing, the other, so it will be good for you. It won't hurt your body. Maybe you'll have good benefits for your nervous system. So then try to do that thing while you're in the temple learning, and that's what you're there for, but not for anything else. So there's not a big question of I don't get personally involved with the students and become friends with everyone and hang out with people, and I believe in community, but I'm not trying to create a community of something around me or around an individual or an idea or something that then can set you apart from the rest of the world. Community means that you're all doing the same kind of a thing here, your goals are basically the same, not that you all cling together all the time, and that becomes your life raft. But that you have a community of purpose, of intention, that then carries your life in good ways and ripples outward when you go back out to the world. So it's a slightly different thinking process in what community means. To build community means to build people of similar intention, not people who just glump together all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm not alone in thinking that way, of course. Yeah. So that's my take on it. Okay, let's go back to Nick Cave for a minute. And I think this is this is an illustration of how I see my life trajectory as well. That I will listen to anything Nick Cave does.
Ditto.
And I'm going to enjoy listening to it because I want to hear what he does. I don't want him to be riding 6-inch, blade for the rest of his life. I don't want, him to be birthday party or kicking against the pricks or any of that for the rest of his life. I want to hear Skeleton Tree, Ghost Team, and Carnage. And I want to hear all of those records and how he evolves and what he's expressing.
Yeah.
So you know what I'm saying. I want to hear all that. I want to hear Nick Cave because I like him as a person.
I'm totally with you, and I think it's so bizarre when someone was I hate that album. It's not like The Last, or it's the Mercy Seat or something, or any artist you're listening to. I can't relate when someone wants an artist to stay in the same circle for the rest of their creative career. I find that really depressing when an artist does that.
100%. And so, as a person who loves yoga and as a teacher, I want and I hope that people who have practiced with me will enjoy how I'm teaching now and how I'm going to be teaching in the future, which is not how I taught 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And I don't want to teach how I taught 25 years ago anymore. I don't even want to practice that way anymore because it was scales.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be stuck playing scales for the rest of my life. I have other things that are moving me. And so the way that the teaching is happening in the temple and the direction I'm moving in towards now is that and it took some work to begin to free myself from being stuck in a format and everything that went along with that, the drawing from all the Ashtanga yoga people and, this is how I make my livelihood teaching Ashtanga yoga, or this is how I have my place in the hierarchy teaching Ashtanga yoga, and this is the thing I'm going to do. I don't necessarily want to be counting vinyasas for the rest of my life. People can learn how to do those and remember how to do them. You don't need to do that all the time. So what else have I explored? What else am I interested in? What else have I learned? And there's a lot of that. And so I'd like to, I'm going to continue teaching those things. And I also still teach Ashtanga yoga because I think there's great value in the practice.
Of course.
There's nothing that I'm rejecting, but I'm also expressing in different ways now. And I hope that over time, there are students who come to me who would like to learn from me because I have something that's worthwhile teaching them. And I would like to be a teacher who has something worthwhile to offer, other than simply the formats of the greatest hits of the past. And then again, it's important. It doesn't negate anything. It's just an allowance and acceptance and an enjoyment of growth. And of seeing, okay, what, again, I needed to reevaluate at a certain point. What is it that I was looking for? Why did I get into this game when I was 21 years old? I was looking for spiritual liberation. I wasn't looking for a guru, necessarily. I was looking for someone to guide me. I wasn't looking for a yoga practice. I wasn't looking to learn Shivananda yoga. I wasn't looking to learn specifically Ashtanga yoga. I'd never heard of it when I went to Mysore the first time. I was looking for spiritual understanding. I was looking for understanding, meaning, purpose. How to live peacefully in the world. How to live in a way that didn't perpetuate becoming a robot to the economy or to the systems that are not leading people towards happiness. How do you live that way? And so for a while I lost that thread because I started getting good at a system rather than getting good at being a human. And so I lost the thread for some years, and then I had to take some work to get it back. And so I'm still going through that process a little bit.
Okay.
And it's honestly it's a little bit scary because you don't know.
I wanted to ask you if it felt scary.
Yeah.
I suppose it's like a dissolution of an identity in some ways, and having to find out what you are beyond what you've. We're always talking about in yoga not attaching to things and not allowing something to become your identity, I suppose, and then we can end up becoming attached to the practice itself, and we identify as an Ashtanga or as a XYZ.
Yeah.
And then before you know it, you've taken on that, and it's very difficult sometimes to just let that go, the thing that you thought was about to liberate.
100%. And this is why when we talk about narratives and create the narratives we create for ourselves, there's this big section in that book on there. And there's a big thing in yoga, of course, about narrative. It's called asmita. The stories you tell about yourself when you don't know who you really are. The hardest one to transcend and to let go of is the spiritual narrative. I'm a spiritual person. I'm a meditator. I'm this yogi, that yogi, the other. That's the hardest one. Because you think when you're there that you're spiritual. And so then you kind of stop doing work a little bit. You're not.
Yeah.
So this is called there are 3 granthis, 3 knots. Brahma granthi, Vishnu granthi, Shiva granthi. The Brahma granthi is the attachment we have to survival. And all the survival issues. Money, sex, food, shelter, name, fame, blah, blah, blah. Vishnu granthi is attachment to emotions. Like the whole range, and relationships. And the Shiva granthi is attachment to spiritual evolution and spiritual concepts and complicated cosmologies and thinking that you know. And but the spiritual identity really. That's the last one, and it's the hardest to transcend.
I can imagine that it's a hard path to walk when you're learning and teaching, or just a student in any capacity in the yogic system, because I think at a certain point you start feeling like you almost have to do more to prove that you're on the right path, and you almost end up in these discussions where there's elements of judgment or shame around the idea that perhaps you haven't read all of the sutras, or you haven't, you can't recite the Upanishads or something like that, and before you know it, it's become just yet another vice that you can get stuck in. I feel like asana is one of the first vices, but I feel like personally myself, I'm starting to feel this new layer, and it sounds like what you're describing, this idea of this knot of spiritual, how did you phrase it?
The Shiva Granthi, the knot of spiritual identity.
Yeah, spiritual identity. Yeah, it's something I wanted to ask you about in respect to it's the nature of yoga, but some people would class it as the spiritual aspect of yoga, because in the West we're quite keen to pry it apart, I think. And I think you've mentioned this in your book, that often yoga is promoted as like, at worst, a stretching class, or at best maybe an exercise class with some mindfulness thrown in. And I wondered if tradition, whilst tradition can be incredibly suffocating, if maybe tradition is a good way of creating some kind of bulwark around yoga and keeping it safe from this westernization where it becomes completely secularized. And so is there value in maintaining some of these traditions that could also be things that we become attached to? Do they also kind of keep yoga in the special place it occupies, which is something other than just a physical exercise?
Well, it might be slightly reductionist to say this, but it's a simple way of framing the whole thing, which is that yoga is an adhyatmic practice. So adhyatmic means adi atma, that which moves firmly towards the self, or directly towards the self. So the yoga practices should move us directly towards our inner self, and that should be the essence of all of them. If they're not doing that, then it's not yoga. If they are doing that, then it is yoga. So we have to keep putting the practices that we do and the intention behind whatever we teach or we practice or promote, that this is what it is. So there's no word for spiritual in Sanskrit. There's a word for spirit, purusha, which also means person. And there are other words as well, but there's no word which means spiritual like the way we use spiritual. And so when we use the word spiritual the way we do, then we can set it off from physical, we can set it off from this, that, or the other. We can even set off spiritual apart from religion. I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. So yoga is adhyatmic. It regards and refers to the self. And Patanjali says that in third sutra of Yoga Sutra. He says that yoga is a process or a practice of stilling the mind, or the fluctuations in the field of chitta, thoughts, emotions, sensations, images, memories, etc. And when those are completely stilled, or when you have eliminated all except for the thought of who am I, or whatever that one thought is that you need, then the self remains as the self alone. Tada drashtahu swarupe avasthanam. Then the self dwells in the self as the self alone. That's adhyatmic. That's the self being the self, and not being other stuff like thoughts.
Yeah.
So that's what yoga is. That's what the practice is about.
That's definitely what yoga is, but I feel like in the West there's a lot of noise over the top of that.
Of course, yeah.
Where
because that's hard to sell.
Yeah, it's really hard to sell. But it's easy to sell how to do a handstand. Like that's easy to sell. And I was wondering if you had any practical advice for teachers watching this who are interested in trying to go deeper and teach something that is closer, or their understanding of a truer version, if you like, of a yogic experience. What is your practical advice to them when there's just this constant tidal wave coming over the West that yoga can be, it's Lululemon, it's finding the right mat, it's going out for a nice coffee afterwards and playing some relaxing music and getting a good stretch, and there's nothing wrong with any of those things in and of themselves, but when the whole sum of the experience is just those things, do you have any practical advice for teachers who are trying to go further than that and trying to stay truer to what yoga ultimately is?
Well, if people are starting to feel that that's not satisfying, and that's not fulfilling, and that is not delivering on what they thought they were looking for through the practice of yoga, then they need to say that to themselves and decide that they need to look further and to open up and invite the possibility of going to the next step, the next layer. and then something will come their way. So don't get stuck there. Don't feel that that's all there is, and don't feel you have to compete in that particular demographic. But start to seek other people who can guide you. Seek mentors, seek the wisdom keepers, seek out your druids who can inspire you and blow your mind a little bit.
We've actually got a friend who's training in druidry at the moment, so maybe we'll go nice him up afterwards.
Yeah, exactly.
By the way, Charlie, have you paid for my parking? Could you do my parking, please? Thank you. Don't want to forget that.
If you find any druids outside,
Before I forget, I wanted to ask you.
But anyway, that's what I would suggest, and and I do that too. I'm always, I seek out teachers a lot when there's something I feel that I want to learn. I love having people around me, and I need to have people around me, particularly Indian teachers who know the tradition. And I don't want to say who they know more than me. It's not hard to know more than me. They're people who know their traditions.
So this comes back to what I was asking about with tradition. Trying to uphold tradition is surely important in as much as it's a way of reminding us that this is something we've taken from a different culture or that we've experienced from a different culture. And I read online, I think, someone was asking why it took you so long to teach in India. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you were saying it took you years to get to that point because India is like the crucible of yoga, and it breathes and bleeds yoga. And for you to go over there, it felt like you had to spend a long time before you were ready to actually go and teach in India. Is that correct?
That's almost correct. I never wanted to teach in India because India is where Indians should teach yoga. That's all there is to it. And I was invited on several occasions by Indians to teach over there, and I resisted and resisted and resisted. And then finally a couple people pushed me hard enough, thinking that it was okay. And some of those experiences were positive, and some I wish that I hadn't done. And now I continue to do things in India because I like being in the Indian yoga teaching and yoga practicing community, not because I think I have something to teach them, but because I like being in that community and meeting new people and knowing who they are and being in that conversation. So over in India, to teach there is for me to be part of this larger conversation of yoga now in India in this present day, not because of anything else. And there's, I'm not looking for money, I'm not looking for anything. I'd like to be there, and I love India. So that's that. But I don't teach in India at the retreat centers that are run by Westerners.
Okay.
I don't do any of that, and I will never do that. I never have, and I will not in the future. I only teach at the invitation of Indians who are working with Indian communities that they would like me to take part in. Because that's a privilege.
Yeah.
And those are the people I want to listen to and learn from. And it's nice that there are so many young Indian teachers who, they'd like to hang out with me and hear about, I'm older than all of them, and at least the ones I've been teaching. But not only that, I've been practicing yoga for longer than a lot of them have been alive.
Yeah.
So I've been doing yoga for 35 years now, a little bit longer than 35 years. And most of the young people in the classes I teach over there are in their 20s or early 30s.
Yeah.
And so I've been at this for longer than they've been on the planet. And so, which doesn't mean anything to me, but it means something to them. That here's someone who's been coming to this country before Western imports were allowed into India. Before 1993.
Wow. When you put it like that.
Nothing from the West was allowed into India.
Really?
Not a Coca-Cola, no English music, no English movies, no English, publications or anything like that. You could read in English, but you weren't going to. There was no deals done with any Western imports whatsoever. It was a different country. I
meant to ask you about that. How do you feel that the international community of yoga, how have you perceived it as having changed over the last 30 years? Do you feel like there has been a lot of change?
I feel that, yoga is still very much yoga in India. And in the big cities, in Bombay and in Delhi, and, probably in Bangalore, you'll start to find now Western influenced yoga classes, vinyasa flow and music and stuff like that. But most of the Indian yoga is still Indian yoga, and it's there and you feel it. And the culture supports this particular bhavana, this particular mood or emotion or feeling behind how yoga is done and why they do it. I like to absorb that into me. I like to absorb that because it's not like that in America. So we need to hold on to that. But I want to mention one thing about tradition. Tradition is a challenging word because if you look up the definition of tradition in the dictionary, it's just something that's been done for one generation. So your grandmother baked a apple pie in a particular way, she taught your mother, now it's family tradition. Now you always do that at your, whatever the holiday is, Christmas, or you don't have Thanksgiving here, so.
No, Christmas.
Yeah, we have it over there in America, so that's what we cook at Thanksgiving. So, tradition comes because someone does it. It could be totally random. The yoga traditions are not random. They are something which have been tested for a long time before they're passed on. That's not so much like Ashtanga yoga tradition. It's pretty new. Like Krishnamacharya taught some stuff to Pattabhi Jois and to a few other people, and they formulated it in their own ways and taught it in a particular way. The way that we're doing Ashtanga yoga now only goes back to Pattabhi Jois, and then to his son and daughter, and then to Sharad, and then to us. Brand new. It's not even 100 years old.
No.
Not even. So, but everyone clings to it like it's was given, from God's mouth, and don't change anything. Why don't you change anything? Out of respect. You didn't make it up. Someone else made it up. So respect their creation, and that's all. But not like it's a magic key to enlightenment. Because from observing the culture of Ashtanga yoga, obviously it's not a key to enlightenment. It's just a key to doing practice in a particular way. And so Iyengar yoga, brand new, only since the 1950s when he left Mysore and started creating his own thing in Pune, he has started his own tradition of Iyengar yoga. It's a couple generations old. Don't change it. Why? You didn't make it up. He did. So respect that. But again, it's not given from God's mouth to his ear. It's through his intuition, creativity, experimentation, and hard work. That deserves respect. And if you want to create your own tradition, you can go ahead and do it. If anyone's dumb enough to listen to you, after a couple of generations, then you got something.
Again, it reminds me of music though, because you get people who are you'll get people who are into metal, and metal has to be a certain way. And in folk, it has to be a certain way. And if you add electronics to a folk album, that was like sacrilege. Or if in metal you put a trumpet in there or something, it's the worst thing in the world.
Bob Dylan picking up an electric guitar.
That would be like the most famous example of this. And we keep cycling back to Nick Cave again and again. That's something else I really enjoyed in his latter work. It feels like they've completely corrupted what you expected from the Bad Seeds. And now you get these long cyclical, almost ambient tracks, especially when you listen to something like Ghosting, where there's no drums, there's no clear rhythm. A lot of it is almost arrhythmic, a lot of loops and stuff, and it feels a lot more nebulous. And for me, that's the most exciting thing in the world, when an artist is willing to change. And I suppose this is exactly what you're talking about with the way we teach yoga, being able to free yourselves from this heavy burden of tradition, but at the same time not just toss it away and kill it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because these postures have been around for a long time. And they're just being put together in different ways. Breathing has been around as long as they're breathing, And what we're doing is changing the pattern of breathing a little bit. So there's nothing new under the sun. There's just ways of communicating things that evoke an experience in a person. Ashtanga yoga is a format which evokes an experience in a person. That's why so many people do it. And the experience is fairly uniform. Iyengar yoga evokes an experience in a person. that experience is fairly uniform. So you have all these different ways of evoking something, drawing something out from a person. And because human beings have evolved together at the same time in a particular way to perceive things in certain ways, we have brains that have evolved together over millions of years that allow us to perceive color in the same spectrum, sound in the same spectrum, taste in the same spectrum, touch in the same spectrum, language in roughly the same spectrum. Some people are outliers and they're more subtle or attuned to a wider spectrum, but for the most part, our brains have evolved together so we can have a communal experience. And within that, there are different types. There are different body types, there are different hair colors, there are different food tastes, there are different temperature, climate, etc. So everyone is unique, but everyone's unique and also fits in a little subgroup, also a little subculture of, people who have red hair, subcultures of people who are super tall. And then there's these medians as well. And so you're going to have all these different practices that people can do that's going to evoke a similar feeling in them that is beneficial, is useful, is worthy, and then they will do those things. You will have different types of music that will sweep hundreds of thousands, millions of people are all drawn to that same thing, but not to the other thing. So they'll go in that direction. And they'll be moved because a similar experience is evoked in them from listening to it. They're moved in the same way. And quite often, the same song will become a hit song because, oh my God, we all love that song so much.
Yeah.
It just does something to me. And the same thing is true for having poses structured together in a particular way. It can do something. Not all songs have tremendous longevity. They might be really popular for 10 years and then no one listens to it. You listen to it now, it sounds completely dated. You do that kind of yoga now, it's completely dated, no interest in it. Some songs are as good now as they were in 1964. You listen to it like it was written yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so some yogas are going to be like that too. So I think that when we look at things like a yoga system, we can think about it as it's evoking a collective experience which is beneficial and useful and is helpful for people. And so let them do those things. And it might be useful for them for a very long period of time or a short period of time. But don't hold to the thing like it's the only thing. Don't hold on to that one song like it's the only song that anyone can ever listen to and all other songs are wrong. All other foods are wrong. All other paintings are wrong. Yoga is a creative act. And so let it exist as a creative act and enjoy it like a creative act. And then maybe there's some other creative acts that you might enjoy too. I look at Matisse today, and, but today I really want to look at, some a Donald Judd neon tube.
Yeah, well, maybe in our gallery there's certainly something neon in there. I can't remember who made those. It's probably another Judd.
So I want to look at some color schemes of James Turrell. And that's I want to be in that open spray. And maybe tomorrow I want to just stare at a Picasso. No one's going to judge you for that.
Yeah.
So why should someone judge us if one day we want to do really slow practices and the next day we want to do something dynamic? Why should we be judged for that?
Yeah.
And why should we judge anyone else for that? It's a creative act and it's a dhyana. If you want to learn something well, it requires discipline. I'm not saying to be a dilettante. We go back to Picasso again, or any of the people we consider to be masters. They were amazing draftsmen. They learned how to draw like anything.
Yeah. There's that quote by I think it's Picasso where he says it took me 5 years to paint like Raphael, but a lifetime to learn to paint like a child.
Yeah, exactly. So you learn the skills, and from learning the technical skills that you need, then you can begin to express yourself.
Yeah.
You can't express yourself through any medium if you don't learn how to work the medium. You can't play like Robert Fripp if you haven't first learned how to play scales and play basic chords. You can't move to that. It doesn't work. And the same goes true for classical musicians and everything. So the same with yoga, like, you can't begin to understand how to find your inner self if you don't understand the medium, the tool. So start with the skills of the body. And to start with the skills of the body, it's very good to have a system. It's very helpful to have a format. And then at a certain point, you won't need all of that format. Maybe you have some of the format. Some salutations, some standing poses, a couple of seated poses, some inversions, and some meditation or whatever.
And then you riff off it.
Yeah, you have the things that you use when you need to use them. You don't have to be bound by the thing forever. And so we very, because we're not sophisticated spiritually, we get bound to formats.
So leading from that, I haven't ever been to your Mysore. What does your Mysore look like nowadays in terms of the asana practice people are doing? Is it more, how does it look?
Well, it looks like a Mysore class.
But what I mean is, are people working within those traditional forms, or are you open for people to improvise or something extemporized?
Yeah, so for, most people are sticking with, the program, as I said. Most people are doing the sequences of Ashtanga yoga. And then there are a few people who can't do them for one reason or another. And so they're doing something different. I have some people in their 80s, some people in their 70s, some people who have some physical limitations or debilitations that need to do other things. And so we do that too. And I see people as people. I don't see people as people who need to be doing a particular format or sequence. Right now, currently, I'm not teaching a whole lot of Mysore classes. I teach one per week.
Okay.
And now I'm mainly teaching lead classes. I'm teaching a couple of pranayama classes a week of sequences of pranayama that I have developed with my friend Robert Moses and Harsh Vardhan, who lives in Bombay. And we have the Sing Yoga Education Collective where we teach pranayama teacher trainings, and we're going to do a teacher teacher training for asanas, philosophy, and pranayama next year. It's a year-long program. And so I teach the pranayama level 1 1 day a week, level 2 1 day a week. I teach something called 1 hour asana 1 day a week, which is my current practices that I'm doing that I share with people. On Sundays I teach a class which is some kriyas, and then some bits of primary, some bits of intermediate, and then closing with some pranayama again. And that's pretty much the most popular class of the week at the school. And then I teach a 1 hour primary series on Friday, and then a straight up primary series 1 day a week also. So
what kind of kriyas are you covering?
Oh, the basic ones. Kapalabhati, Ashwini Mudra, Agnisara, Uddiyana Kriya, Intrataka.
I asked because when I was telling my students about the weekend coming up, I made the mistake. I got stuck in a line I had to commit to. When Charlie and I were in India, we did like Vamana Dhauti, we did Shankapakshama, and I started talking about that. And I could tell I was just putting them all off, and I was like, I don't think you'll be doing that with any this week, so I just wanted to double check that.
Yeah.
Those were the kriyas you were covering.
Yeah, everyone's going to get a bucket. And yeah.
Good, okay.
No, we won't be doing any of those.
And in terms, just to scratch that itch, because I'm interested, when you teach primary in an hour, how are you condensing it for an hour's experience? I teach an hour primary myself, and I'm always trying to find different ways to condense it. I'm never quite happy with how
What are you doing?
In terms of how I condense it? It changes depending on who's in the room. If I have people who are very experienced, I might move a little quicker and just focus on less seated. I always do full standing, and I do the majority of finishing. If I have people in there who look like rabbit in the headlight, then I might just go 45 minutes in standing, and then just do 2 or 3 things from finishing. It just completely depends on who I'm faced with.
Cool. So the 1 hour Ashtanga, of course there are many different ways of doing it, like you said, depending on who's there. Sun salutation, A and B 3 times.
Each?
A 3 times, B 3 times.
Yes.
All of the standing poses, except no twisted Parishvakonasana. And then, after Parishvottanasana, straight to Paschimottanasana.
Okay, so you chop off the end of the stand.
Yes, so the first pose of primary is actually Utkatasana. And the Uttita Hasta and Ardhabada Padmottanasana used to actually come at the end of primary, and then they were moved up to the beginning at a later date. But I leave those two out, and we go straight to Paschimottanasana, and then Paschimottanasana is linked with Purvattanasana, and then jump back, and then jump through, and then the Ardha Baddha Padma Paschimottanasana and Tiryen Mukhe Kapada Paschimottanasana are done one after the other, with no jumping back between sides, and no jumping back between the asanas. And then one Janu Shirshasana A, jump back, jump through. Marichasana A and B, linked together, no jumping back between sides. So there's no jumping back between sides of anything, but Marichasana A and B go together, then jump back, jump through. C and D go together, jump back, jump through. Navasana, Bhujapidasana, and Kurmasana go together, jump back, jump through. Garbhapindasana, Kukatasana, Baddha Konasana all go together. So 3 in a row, jump back, jump through. And then Upavishta Konasana, Supta Konasana, link together. So after you do the B of Upavishta, grab your toes, roll on your back, which is extremely pleasant. Come back or down.
Yeah.
And then Supta Padangushtasana all the way up through Urdhva Paschimottanasana, all linked together, one after the other. And then Shalabhasana, A and B, instead of Setu Bandhasana. 3 back bends, 5 finishing poses. All the finishing poses except for the Urdhva Padmasana and Pimandasana. Skip those two.
Okay.
Do the rest. And that'll do it.
Excellent. Nice.
Yeah.
Glad I got that on camera. I'll go back and
Yeah.
hear that.
And if it is a group where you can see there's going to be some struggles with Bhujapidasana, Kurmasana, and the Garbhapindasana, after Navasana, I go right to Baddha Konasana.
Okay.
Which is extremely good if you haven't done that, because Navasana is going to tighten the hip flexors for most people, and Baddha Konasana is going to release the hip flexors for most people.
Nice.
So you put those two things together, it's extremely pleasant, and no jump back. So you do your 5 Navasanas, and then the last time, instead of crossing your ankles, put your feet together and open the knees. It's immensely pleasant.
Nice.
And bend forward, people love it. So that's a really good way too, especially if like you're running out of time a little or something like that.
Sure.
I like to do that. Now, for those who are very interested in tradition, this has historical precedence
Oh, okay.
in that for people who are really weak, Patabi Joyce used to not have them jump back in between all the poses. Nancy Gilgoff was one of those people, and she's written about that. When I was taught, and when Sharat was taught, we didn't jump back in between sides ever.
Really?
Never.
Oh my gosh.
I never saw jumping back in between sides until a lead class in 1993, which was 2.5 years into the game. When Patabi Joyce came to America, I'd never done a lead class before that. I didn't particularly like it. And but in the Mysore thing, right side, left side, jump back. Paschimottanasana and Purvattanasana were always linked together. And then after, I went to the lead classes in New York, and he had us jumping back in between Paschimottanasana and Purvattanasana. At one point when I had some back pain, he said, it's because you're jumping back between those two postures, you should link them together. So I stopped jumping back in between them again. Did nothing for my back pain, but it saved me time. There were a lot of things that used to be linked together that were then separated apart, and then that was taken as the way to do it.
Yeah.
I much preferred it when we didn't jump back in between sides.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's good to know.
And then there were times when, I remember once in Mysore, I fell off my bike and I landed on my wrist, and I couldn't do Chakwari, or I couldn't do anything. And he and Sharat didn't give me any suggestions of what to do. I just said, I can't. I said, that's what he said. And so I wouldn't do sun salutations for about a month or so. Because I couldn't, I would just start with Padangusthasana, Padahastasana. I did the standing poses, and then I would sit on the floor, and I would do all the primary poses one after the other without jumping back. And I do my intermediate poses without jumping back, and that's what I did for my practice for a few weeks. And it might not have been a month, but it was definitely a few weeks. I learned a lot about how the poses fit together, about what didn't really fit together well, but about what really did fit together well for my body by not jumping back ever.
Nice.
And I really think that's a wonderful thing for people to try every once in a while.
Yeah.
You know, because you can get very carried away by thinking that the jumping through and the jumping back is the important part. And you know, the posture is just something you do.
Yeah.
And an absolute ridiculous obsession that people get with, you know, how to jump back, how to jump through it. No one really ever cared in my sport in those early days. Just get through, it doesn't matter,
Yeah.
get there.
Yeah.
And then it started being called the vinyasa.
Right.
It's not the vinyasa.
No.
Every single thing you do in the practice is a vinyasa as long as you're breathing and moving. So a lot of misunderstandings around that one particular part of the technique, which is all it is. It's a technique. Vinyasa is a technique. It's an application.
Yeah.
And just remember, techniques are not the thing. It's a way of learning how to do something.
Absolutely.
Until you can figure out what it is you're supposed to be paying attention to.
Well, I feel like we could carry on talking, but I think you're about to start. What is it you're doing this evening?
What time is it?
It's 25.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
And when does that start? 5 o'clock?
5 o'clock.
So
We should wrap it up.
we should wrap this up. I promised before, maybe a couple of last questions, I asked people on Instagram if they had anything they wanted to ask you. There wasn't anything that we probably haven't already covered other than drishti. Someone who's practiced with David Swenson was asking, do you have the attitude that drishti should be a literal thing, like you literally look at your big toe, or is more of an energetic idea that you're lifting the gaze towards whichever part of the body you're looking to? This was this person's question.
What did David tell them?
Energetic, so not literally.
All right, well if David's their teacher, then they can do that.
Good answer. Other than that, everything else I feel like we covered, so hopefully if you did have questions, they've been ticked off that list for you guys. And yeah, my last question, maybe you could try and picture for us, where do you think the practice and the teaching of yoga will be in the next 500 years? We have this burgeoning conversation. I wanted to ask about consciousness and AI, but that'll be maybe for another time. And I had a student say to me, you'll be alright, because yoga teachers, you're not going to get an AI to teach you yoga. But surely AI is going to change everything in terms of white collar jobs and that. And I guess this is already a massive question, so let's try and bring it back down again. Where do you think yoga will be in 500 years' time?
Well, they already have AI teaching yoga, and they've been developing that for some time. In fact, I was asked to be part of an AI app for yoga stuff pre-pandemic, which I declined to do because it was not exciting for me. I had literally no interest in it. And basically what happens is the camera will read your posture and tell you when you need to move yourself into alignment.
And then it's just alignment, though, then it's just making a
That's
shape.
it. Yeah, I'm not interested. It'll be beneficial for a lot of people,
Yeah.
and I'm sure they'll make money. But that doesn't excite me.
No.
I have no idea where yoga's going to be in 500 years. I like to think sometimes that whatever we do with something now is going to determine how it is in the future. So, whatever is not valuable or useful or has been harmful about yoga in this time that we have been living in, I hope that it's not present in 500 years. And whatever is beneficial in yoga, which is going to be helping people who still suffer from the same type of human conditions that we have now in 500 years, I hope that yoga will help them and it will still be around for them. I'm pretty sure we don't practice yoga now the way it was practiced 500 years ago.
So the same thing.
Even 100 years ago, it's likely that it was quite a bit different. There's a lot of new things that have been happening. So people are going to take it, they're going to do stuff with it, it's going to look really different. As long as it's still adhyatmic, I don't think it matters what it looks like.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Alistair, for coming today.
Thank you.
Thanks for talking with me.
We can do it again next time we have to bring instruments.
I will see you tomorrow, and I hope you have a good night here at Love Yoga. And thanks, guys, for listening to us for so long.
You're not staying around tonight?
I have to teach, so
okay,
I'm
cool.
teaching in like 4 or 5 minutes. So
All
I'm
right,
going
cool.
to shoot.
Have a great class.
Thank you.
Welcome.
2 classes back to back, and then I'll
Awesome.
see you tomorrow.
Awesome.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Me as well.
Nice. How long was that?
We didn't say anything that was useful anyway.